Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this webinar on Europe's press freedom battlegrounds. My name is Scott Griffin, and I'm moderating today's webinar on behalf of the Media Freedom Rapid Response. I'm the Deputy Director of the International Press Institute, which is a global media freedom organization and a network of editors, journalists, and publishers for press freedom. So it's a real pleasure to be here this afternoon moderating this conversation, which is also taking place just one day before World Press Freedom Day 2024, which is tomorrow. So that's the occasion why we've gathered here this afternoon to talk about the challenges that press freedom in Europe faces. And just before introducing the topic further, I want to welcome the really outstanding panelists that we have here with us this afternoon. I'd like to welcome Beata Balagova, who is the editor-in-chief of SME, which is a leading daily newspaper and news site in Slovakia. We're also joined by Bartosz Wilinski, who's the deputy editor-in-chief of Gazeta Wyborcza, a major daily newspaper in Poland and news site as well. Stefano Verghine, who's a freelance investigative journalist and contributor to Domani. From Germany, we're joined by Stefan Grimberg, who is a senior editor at the Katholische Nachrichtenagentur and part of that agency's media section. And finally, I'd like to welcome Ramona Strugario, who is MEP and was a lead negotiator on the European Media Freedom Act for the European Parliament's Libe Committee. So thanks to all of you for joining us this afternoon. And just a few housekeeping notes before we move forward. I do want to remind everyone that the webinar is being recorded, so just keep that in mind. And for those who aren't able to join online, they will be able to view that later on. And the second reminder is that we will, towards the end of the webinar, have an opportunity or give the opportunity to viewers to ask questions, and you can do that in the Q&A box. I'll be looking out for that, so feel free to put your questions in the box anytime. By way of brief introduction, I think we're all aware that the reason we're here is because press freedom is under threat around the world, but also here in Europe. And this is a really crucial year for journalism, for press freedom. It's a huge election year. We see a number of elections taking place that will decide the political future in a number of countries in the EU, but also, of course, in the EU itself ahead of the European Parliament elections in early June. And our first speaker today from Slovakia will sort of talk about the impact of the recent parliamentary elections in Slovakia, but also the presidential elections that took place earlier this year. So it's a really important time. It's a crucial time. And we're here today to hear from 5 experts about why this moment is so important, what we're facing, and what we can do about it to protect public interest journalism and independent journalism going forward. So I'm going to leave it at there for myself, and I'm going to head over right now to our first speaker, who is Beata Balagova, editor-in-chief of SME in Slovakia. And I want to start with you, Beata, because of what's happening in Slovakia right now. We're seeing very serious things taking place, very serious pressure being placed on the media after the re-election of Robert Fico to become prime minister. And I'm hoping you can sort of set the stage for us and help us understand what's happening in Slovakia. You and I have talked, many times in the past that if Fico were to come back into power, that he would, try to go down the path of Orban and instill the sort of sense of media capture in the country. So is that what's happening right now? Is that what we're seeing in Slovakia? If you could take us through what's happening in your country. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. And yes, this is exactly what is happening. But it's not only that Robert Fico is trying to copy Viktor Orban, but he's trying to do the media capture, what Orban did over the past decade. He's trying to do it in a concentrated and the shortest possible time. That's why all the attacks are so brutal, and that's why it's so intense. And I would sum up all the challenges maybe in 3 major points. And the first is, of course, the concentrated and unhidden attack at public service media. And I would say that because in Slovakia all the previous governments have followed that path, so there was the political mentality that whoever is in power has a right to have their people in the public service media and influence the public service media. So among the public, it took a while until they realized like how dangerous the governmental approach to public media right now. And it is also combined with an attack at private media. So what Robert Fico is doing, he's trying not only to get public media under control, but putting pressure on the biggest private television channel, Markiza, which if we are talking in parallels, it has a very similar importance that RTL Club, the very last free public broadcaster in Hungary. And that pressure is possible because Markiza is actually dependent to a certain degree on state advertisement. And Robert Fico already said that they might put their hand on, for example, the money that the lottery company gives to Markiza in advertisement revenues. The very same is happening towards TVOI. It's another private broadcaster. And it doesn't happen openly. It really happens in a way of suggestions and hidden pressures. But when you talk to some of the anchors, some of the major reporters, you can see that the ownership of these television stations are trying to suggest to their journalists that let's do more entertainment and perhaps let's do less critical reporting, and you will be free in a way. You can do like lighter news, which is really in line what Robert Fico is saying for a long time. And he got this narrative from Viktor Orban that the media shouldn't be here to do any watchdog job, because first you journalists run for office, get elected, and then you can try to control us. The second area of big concern is how Robert Fico is legitimizing the disinformation media and the disinformation sites. And we are not only talking about, let's say, like traditional media, but bloggers and the whole army of trolls who are now elevated to the level of standard media. They get preference at press conferences, while Robert Fico is not answering questions posed by critical media like SME or Děníken or even Markiza. They would answer questions posed by these disinformation media sites, which are greatly pushing through the narrative of Kremlin. They are pushing through anti-American, anti-LGBTQ, and very often even anti-Brussels narrative. And I will just mention quickly one example, that the governmental party, Smer, started cooperating with a neo-Nazi who is hiding in Great Britain because there are 3 warrants issued against him. His name is Daniel Bombitz, and he was caught meeting neo-Nazi people, and he severely attacks journalists, even my colleague Zuzana Kovačić-Hanzelová, who after such brutal attacks decided to withdraw from doing political reporting for a while. And if you imagine that the state money and the money of taxpayers end up with these disinformation sites, it's really concerning. And the third area of concern is really the increasing attacks at journalists. I already hinted that these attacks are coming also from people who are organized around the ruling party. These attacks are coming from the politicians themselves, and but also they are a result of encouragement by political attacks. And the volume is really unseen. I don't remember being under such pressure by hateful trolls who are sending hateful emails, or you can read them like as post under stories, and but also personally sometimes on streets. And I think that the difference between what happened in Hungary and over the past decade is that these attacks are very personal. So they are no longer just liberal journalists as in general, but these people are naming concrete journalists and are turning concrete journalists into targets. And I think that this package of challenges we are facing now, it's also a test for the European Union. And I have said it several times, because as I mentioned, the legislation regarding the public service media, it's clearly is at odds with the Media Freedom Act, violates the Media Freedom Act, even after the cosmetic changes that were done by the government. And I think that it will be very important, not only for Slovakia, but the whole European community, to see if the European Union will be able to effectively step in while seeing all these violations of values. But I'm also a little bit pessimistic how all the provisions of that Media Freedom Act will be kept in Slovakia. And I think that in several points, the current government will violate them.
Thanks a lot, Beata, for sharing that with us. And actually, you kind of preempted the question that I was going to ask you, which is, do you think that, because what we saw in Hungary since 2010, 2011 was that almost nothing was done, especially at the beginning, by the European Union to step in and prevent what was happening. And I think one of the questions is, have we actually learned a lesson from that? And do we now have the tools, and will we apply them? Will will the European Union apply them in the case of Slovakia? So I think that you've sort of already answered, well, now is the test moment. But it sounds like you're a little bit skeptical that may succeed.
We are in the process of testing it. But I also think that it won't be possible just by following the wording of the law. The European Union will have to really check also the spirit, how the country keeps the spirit of the law. And I will just say one example with the public service television. The law changed in a way that, okay, the director of the public service television can be recalled only by naming a reason. But, like the government can come up with any reason, and how will it be checked by European authorities that, the whole the set of personal changes that will be made in the public service television was at odds with the law? Also, it's inseparable what the state of the rule of law will be in the country, because there is the provision that it is forbidden to use intelligence service methods and phone taping and other devices against journalists, but it can be checked only by courts. And if you have an autocratic government which really can overtake and change the independence of court or the prosecution, as it is happening in Slovakia, who will be the one to check if the law is kept? So what I am saying is that in Robert Fico would never dare to take the steps what he has taken if in case of Hungary the European Union would have been effective. And I think that now is not only Slovakia or the fate of the Slovak media is at play, but the whole concept of the EU being able to really protect journalists from those dangers that it addresses in the Media Freedom Act.
Thanks, Beata. We have Ramona here, Strogario MEP, who worked on the European Media Freedom Act. Ramona, I have you sort of penciled in towards the end of the discussion, but If you want, you can also jump in now if you have any thoughts about the ability of the European Media Freedom Act to respond to what's happening in Slovakia. Otherwise, we can come back to it at the end of the discussion, of course. So as you prefer.
It is really up to how you want to handle the discussion, because I can, reply to each and every situation mentioned, or I can comment right now. But that's up to you.
Sure.
So I can.
Let's come back at the end. We'll
Okay.
come back at the end and have you round it up. But I think we have a lot of already food for thought here in terms of how the EU can to what's happening. So Beata, thank you very much for sharing what's happening in Slovakia. We're going to pivot a little bit now to kind of in a way, an opposite, a case of things going in a very different direction. In fact, I'm moving over to Poland and Bartosz Wilinski from Gazeta Wyborcza, because Poland was a country where media capture where things were headed very much in a Hungarian direction for several years. Under the PiS government. A lot of elements of media capture were taking place. And now, since last year's elections, things possibly heading in a very different direction. So Bartosz, I wonder if you can kind of give us an update about what's happening in Poland in terms of undoing efforts of media capture, what that looks like, and whether it's possible, and what it actually takes to do that, and whether you're optimistic that we can really return to a truly free and pluralistic media environment in Poland. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Scott. The main problem is that the EU is no help. The EU is no help in dealing with autocrats, only if you have a society which is determined to deal with them on the battleground, on the tilted battleground, because the elections last year in Poland were not fair. The government had, billions at their disposals, billions of zloty, millions of euro. They produce a lot of electoral materials, propaganda stuff. They engage entire state into the campaign mode. So even the smallest government agency, even the smallest government entity, smallest company that belongs to the state was involved in the electoral campaign for the PiS government, and that's the fact. And they failed. They failed, but because people were extremely mobilized. We used to have such a turnout in the elections twice in our history. First elections 1919, when the Poles went for the first time to elect the parliament, and now 2023. So it's nice, scale to see that. And the EU didn't help, and I don't think that EU would help our Slavic brothers and sisters because, simply EU is not eager to deal with such phenomena like authoritarianism, the lack of instrumentarium, and media freedom was never an issue in all those conflicts between Polish government and European government. There was a secondary problem. Actions that has been taken by the Commission against Poland never touched the issue, never seriously touched the issue of the media freedom in Poland. But now we are after that. The PiS is in the opposition, is strong, still influential. But the major change that was achieved was that this propaganda captured public broadcaster is no longer in service. But the problem that we have faced was that the new government, the government of Donald Tusk, of Democratic Coalition, they could go the very legal way, and they could go the risky way. I wouldn't use the term illegal or not legal, because it seems to be some kind of confusion. They could tolerate that and try to change the law, try to convince the president to sign the law. The president of Poland is still the fanatical member of the PiS party. Andrzej Duda is supporting PiS at every possible in every possible situation. So surely he would deny any legislative changes that would change the structure of the public media. The other thing is that the PiS was prepared for the situation that they could lose the power in Poland, and they have created a complex structure that would enable their people to be in charge of the public broadcaster. And what was done? There was some kind of, it was like a intelligence operation, secret operation. So the first step was the declaration of the Polish Parliament in December 2023. So approximately 17 or 18 of December, Polish Parliament proclaimed that the public broadcaster must stop spreading all those fake news, lies in propaganda, and must be public again, not serving the political party like PIS. And then they started a huge uproar. They were expecting some kind of police action and force being used against them. And these politicians started to, spend a lot of time inside the TVP buildings. They started to prepare, to mobilize their people to fight in defense of their television. And suddenly there was approximately 11, 12 on the 20th of December. While we were watching the broadcast, there was a guy telling that the Tusk government was going to dismantle the freedom of media in Poland, that they after free journalists, that they want to impose dictatorship in Poland. And suddenly something switched and the guy was gone. The signal of this propaganda broadcaster was simply switched off. Was switched off because the government got their people in this technical branch of public television, and they decided to support the government and simply switched the signal, switched off the signal of the public broadcaster. And then the hell started. All the politicians of the PIS started moved to the quarters of public television. They organized a demonstration. They elected one of leading propaganda figures to be new chairman of Polish televisions. And suddenly the new CEO of the television revealed what were the wages, what were the salaries of those most important propaganda figures in public broadcast. And suddenly the Poles learned that those guys were earning approximately 300,000 zloty monthly. There's approximately more than almost 100 euro monthly. So huge salaries. You won't get that in normal job. Even now the Polish CEOs of the biggest company don't have salary like that. So they were simply earning millions of zloty yearly. And when that fact was revealed, suddenly the PIS politicians and their supporters stopped to demonstrate, stopped to occupy the buildings. They simply went home because they learned that, this is not the fight they were on. This is not the fight for the free media. There was a fight for salaries for those people. And after a month of the boycott of the new Polish television, the PiS politicians returned to the studios. Now they take part in all the discussions. And that what we observe now is that the level of the programs in technical way has dropped, because all journalists who are propagandists, but they were professionals. They know how to work with the camera, how to address the person in the studio, how to deal with all those prompters and other technical stuff. They were replaced with fresh ones, and they are not so skilled. They need some experience, some practice. So we see some mistakes being made, and it doesn't look good. There's a problem with the financing, because the PiS people, they control National Council on Television and Radio, and this council is sharing the money which people are obliged to pay for usage for the right of the usage of the television. And they say that they won't transfer the money on the accounts of public televisions because they believe that all the changes were illegal, so they stopped finance them. And now the government must find a new way of financing the state television. And another problem is that the government isn't very interested in having anything to do with the public televisions. They believe that the less political influence, the better. And well, for sure they're right, but this television needs money to run to get their position.
Yeah, if I could just jump in there, because I think one question, and maybe just like to get you a brief view on this. I mean, one thing is to come into power and try to undo the damage done by the previous government, which had this illiberal approach to media. Another thing is to take active steps to put in place safeguards, for the future, and make sure that political influence isn't used as an abuse, isn't used as a tool in the future. And I was wondering, just very briefly from your side, I mean, do you see this government, the Tusk government, as interested in doing that?
Well, they are not in the position to do that because each legislation must be signed by the president. As I said, the president is a supporter of the PS party, and he simply won't sign anything which is against the will of the chairman of the PS, of Jarosław Kaczynski. And well, he sends all possible bills to the Constitutional Court to be judged if they are constitutional or not. So he's obstructing the legislation in Poland simply. And they don't even try. And the other problem is how to do it. And we have a very long-lasting discussion on that, what to do with the public media. It started, in the most dark period of the PiS government. And should we have a media like Germany, public media with a very broad representations of the society in the body that controls the program? Should we maybe discard the public media? Is it really necessary to have a media that will be still in danger of being, instrumentalized by the ruling party? So we didn't decide what to do with that, and I don't see possibility. And of course, I don't see the will of the government to do something with this. This is a secondary problem now.
Thanks a lot, Bartosz. I think that they really raised a number of important points, and yeah, it shows, I think, on the one hand, how difficult it is to undo media capture. This isn't something that happens just when a political change takes place. There are structures that have been put in place on purpose by these illiberal governments, and then it's not something that from one day to the next can be undone. And I think the second question is really, how do you then move forward in a way that just doesn't repeat the cycle of politicization?
But let me add only one phrase to that, what you said. Nothing which was done within 8 years, the demolition of the rule of law culture in Poland, the democracy and so on, nothing could be changed within a few months. So we observed that with the police behavior, we observed that in judiciary, in economy. So all the aspects of, semi-authoritarian government are long-lasting, and you really need the time. And we also see the frustration among the democratic liberal voters in Poland that they expected that those guys should be in prison. They should be at least arrested or apprehended by the police. Nothing changes. So yeah, that's a problem, that people want us to be more hasty as we could be.
Okay, so we'll be following that situation closely, and I think now we're going to jump a little bit. We've been talking about the situation in Central Europe, where there's been a lot of focus in the past few years in terms of the press freedom situation, also in Hungary. We're going to move westward a little bit and focus on two countries where press freedom at least has traditionally been more strongly protected. And starting with Italy, to understand what's happening under the Meloni government. And we're joined by Stefano Verghine, who works with the newspaper Domani. And Stefano, I think it would be, I would love to hear from you kind of about two things. One is that you yourself and two fellow reporters are under investigation, facing a criminal investigation for having requested to receive confidential documents and sort of breaching secrecy. So, I think it would be great if you could just briefly summarize what this case is about, but more broadly, if you could help us understand, what does this case say about the environment for journalists in Italy under the Meloni government, and sort of more broadly, what is happening right now in Italy, and how concerned are you about the direction of protections for media freedom? So thanks a lot for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you, Scott. Thanks for having me. Let me start from our specific case. As you were mentioning, the main reason why I'm here today is that two of my colleagues at Domani and I are under investigation by Italian judicial authorities, and we face up to 9 years in jail. The investigation started in October 2022 after Domani published articles outlining a conflict of interest concerning Italy's defense minister Guido Crosetto, who is still in charge and is one of the founders of Giorgia Meloni's party. To cut it short, we revealed that for years before being appointed as minister, Crosetto was paid by the arms industry as an advisor. He took around 2 million euros in 4 years, and the minister, after we published this piece of news, has never denied the information we published, yet he filed a complaint with the aim of identifying our alleged source, as the data we revealed were not public. As a result, prosecutors started to investigate us and came to the conclusion that we have received dozens of documents over the years by a financial police officer who was working at the anti-mafia judiciary body. This is what we know at the moment. The investigation is still ongoing. However, what we can say is that according to the charges, we allegedly received documents regarding businessmen, members of criminal organizations, and politicians. And we used these documents to publish many articles. We are under investigation by Perugia Prosecutor's Office for 2 specific crimes. One is for breaching, as you were saying, the secrecy of investigations. And the other crimes, which is connected to the first one, is for illegal access to confidential databases where these documents were held. The thing is that under the Italian Criminal Code, maximum punishment for illegal access to confidential databases is currently 3 years, which needs to be multiplied by 3 as the crime is considered to be continuous, meaning that we did it many times over the years. And for these reasons, we risk up to 9 years. But besides the punishment issue, what is unique for Italy is having prosecutors trying to chase journalist sources and doing this after a complaint filed by a minister. This is quite unique, and this is why we decided to speak out on the case. We received a lot of support by many organizations, and of course, we're very happy about this. But we fear that the current investigation on us might actually be a broader attempt to breach the confidentiality of journalistic sources, which is, of course, the base of any kind of journalism. So I think what is happening to us can sound like a message to all the rest of our colleagues in Italy, at least, and their sources. And this is what is really disturbing, in my opinion. But you were asking this, so let me put all this into the context of press freedom in Italy under the government led by Meloni. There are many news. The latest news is about one of the most famous writer in Italy, whose name is Antonio Scurati, and he was censored by RAI, which is the Italian public TV. So Scurati, who's the writer, had an agreement for making a speech against fascism. The speech in the end was cancelled, and the newscaster denounced that it was for censorship. Still on RAI, the government was recently able to pass an amendment to RAI's regulation. This change basically ensures that members of the government will have more time on public TV programs compared to other politicians from different parties. And this is happening right before the EU elections. RAI, as you know, is the Italian national public TV. It has 3 channels on cable TV, and other 3 channels out of the 7 most popular channels are owned by Silvio Berlusconi's family. So they're linked to Forza Italia, which is part of the government. When it comes to newspapers, the government can rely on 3 of the biggest Italian newspapers. These papers are owned by an entrepreneur called Antonio Angelucci, who is a member of the parliament for Lega, and Lega is part of the coalition government led by Meloni. Also, Angelucci, so the same guy, is now trying to buy AGI, which is the second biggest Italian press agency. So if you put together all these, you have TVs, newspapers, and possibly now this press agency, and you see to what extent Meloni's government is trying to get control of the media. Last but not least, I would say we are facing many attempts by politicians aiming at increasing punishment for journalists that reveal news of public interest. Just to give you an example very shortly, the Italian parliament is currently discussing a draft law providing two big changes for journalists. One is that reporters would risk up to 3 years in jail if they publish news resulting from breach of secrecy of the investigation. Today, the punishment for this kind of crime is up to 1 year. On top of this, the draft law provides to incriminate journalists that reveal news resulting from breach of secrecy of the investigation. So the punishment would be also for money laundering, and the punishment for money laundering is up to 8 years in Italy. So to sum it up, yes, I wouldn't say that that the press freedom situation in Italy is okay at the moment.
Thanks a lot, Stefano, for taking us through that, and just take the opportunity to underscore solidarity of IPI and the other MFRR partners with you and your colleagues. Many organizations, as you mentioned as well, signed a petition supporting your case, and calling this an effort to silence your investigative reporting. I put a link to that petition letter in the chat here so everyone can see it. And quite a few concerning developments there in Italy. And coming now to our final speaker from the first round, Stefan Krimberg from Germany, which is a country that we typically wouldn't be talking about in discussions about threats to media freedom. But this is also a crucial time in Germany for a number of reasons. Coming up this fall, elections taking place in 3 states in Eastern Germany where, the far-right Alternative for Germany, AfD, is expected to make big gains. And we know that the party has not been a friend towards free media. And so there's a lot of concern about what might happen in an environment where journalists are already under attack from extremist elements in society, online attacks, in some cases attacks on journalists having protests, and more. So, Stefan, can you help us understand what's happening in Germany and what's at stake, and what risks you see going forward for a country that's long been seen as a leader in media freedom? You're still muted.
Yep. I have to unmute me. Thanks, Scott. Can gladly do this, and thanks for having me. Well, the basic situation in Germany is still very good compared to our colleagues in Central Europe, and also, of course, with regards to many other countries in the world. However, we have experienced, at least since the pandemic, or perhaps even in Eastern Germany or in the east of Germany, a little bit before that, a kind of media adversary that journalists are really these days perceived as not neutral spectators or broadcasters doing their job, reporting on things, but part of an ongoing discussion, part of an ongoing fight even. So they are now regarded as kind of hostile force by certain elements of the public, which leads to sometimes violent clashes during especially demonstrations. We've just heard new figures that in 2023 we had even more attacks on journalists than the year before. What we also say is that many colleagues tell us that they're afraid to cover certain events like demonstrations and protests because they're afraid that they might be attacked or might be threatened by certain elements who are out there on the streets. And especially in local reporting and local journalism, we have a massive problem. Local journalism in Germany is traditionally catered for by local newspapers. Most of them have financial difficulties due to lack of advertising and falling circulation. So money is sparse, and with these threats now at local level, I think it's the same all over the world, obviously. But when you're reporting on, let's say, some right-wing people who come up to you and tell you, well, we know where you live or where your daughter goes to school, that affects basically our colleagues. So there is kind of a perceived self-censorship in some local reporting. I mean, I'm happy to say that that's very, very few cases, but still it's a problem that we need to address. Which brings me to the bigger problem of the AfD party that you mentioned, and which is forecasted to win the elections in the three East German states in autumn in Brandenburg, Thuringia, and Saxony. They are unlikely to be in government because all other parties have, excuse me, have ruled out going into coalition with the AfD. However, I'm not too optimistic that this pledge will hold forever. And the AfD has a tradition of calling, for example, media Lügenpresse, which is the press that lies to the people. They have managed to build up over the past couple of years a string of what they call alternative media outlets. They are very good in using social media to address their base and followership. And in their party program, they clearly have some strategies which would lead to the abolishment of the public broadcasting system that we have so far. So they want to shrink it to, let's say, a US style model with a subscription base only, which would put an end to the rather lavish public broadcasting system that we enjoy in Germany at the moment. With regards to this public broadcasting system, it's not only the AfD party which is a threat there, but we have at the moment a big debate going on further financing this public broadcasting system. There's a very complex and, let's say, state-free independent process to determine how much money they should get. But 6 states, also from the West, some of them have already announced that they won't stick to the rules. So there's some deadlock there, which I am quite well interested in how this is going to develop further.
Thanks a lot, Stefan, for kind of painting that picture for us of what's happening in Germany. So we've heard now from 4 speakers from 4 different countries, where the situation is headed in different directions. We've heard a couple of commonalities. Attacks on the public broadcaster, pressure on public broadcaster is certainly one of those commonalities that we've heard. But I do now want to bring in Ramona. And I want to emphasize, actually, before we start, that Ramona is someone within the European Parliament who's been a strong ally for press freedom and independent journalism. And Ramona, what I really want to ask you today is, because you were very closely involved in thinking about the European Media Freedom Act and negotiating for the Libe Committee. We've heard a lot here about the dangers to press freedom. We heard about how, there was a view that the Commission was far too slow to react in the case of Hungary. Now Slovakia is a test case. The EMFA that we have now, which was the product of many years of negotiation of advocacy by different groups, is this tool, this law, is it fit for purpose in your opinion? Do we have something that can really protect media freedom across the member states? For example, in the case of Slovakia at the moment. I'm grateful for your thoughts on this, and in general your reactions to what you've heard, of course.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the invitation. Happy anniversary, first and foremost, and long live free media. I believe this is one of the crucial things that have to happen in the next years, that I see as quite challenging, to be honest. And if we do not do more and more every day to protect free media, I think the risk is real to significantly weaken the rule of law framework, because I was paying attention to what Beata was mentioning earlier. I think she's perfectly right. And then also our democracies in the end. I do believe that ENFA is fit for a purpose. And more than that, I think that before having, in the end, this historical piece of legislation, because at the beginning of this mandate, I didn't expect that we would have it. And I know, and I think you all know all of this endless discussions on whether we should have a piece of legislation at all. Should there be a regulation, a directive? How will we in the end explain the fact that we want to regulate media, which is not the case, because it doesn't regulate media. Actually, it equipping literally journalists with a set of very important tools to withstand pressure on the one hand, and the other hand face challenges related to their independence. And I think it is also ensuring a stronger framework and safeguards for the functioning of free media. So back to the initial thought, I think that today, yes, we have a regulation fit for purpose. I'm happy it is a regulation, very happy that it is a regulation, and that it's finally, and I'm also thinking about the anti-SLAPP directive, happening, that we do have legislation addressing media freedom issues and starting to build this framework for the protection of journalists. We really didn't have anything. We had debates, we had conferences, we had recommendations. There are some things happening in the DSA, but that's I think the first time when we finally have rules, very clear rules, which are functioning like the legislation of every member state. Basically, that's a regulation means that this is national legislation for each and every member state. Now, I'm fully aware that and we are fully aware that ENFA is not perfect, and that there's no magical wand to fix the issues that I just heard. And yes, indeed, they are worrying. And I am afraid that for certain situations and examples, at least, the worst is yet to come, because they're gaining ground and a lot of courage to act. And I think as long as we will have vicious politicians in power, yes, there will be attacks to media freedom, or people that think that they are above the law and that nothing honestly can happen to them and their systems, the systems that they're building. But just to give you a few examples from ENFA, Article 7, for example, dealing with the independence of the media regulators, and there were mentions that we heard here. We didn't talk about Mr. Orban, but he's the one going around every time this things that are fundamental, like the independence of media regulators, and it's happening as like I heard it in other member states as well. Now, with provisions that we have in Article 7, basically he will not be able, and others will not be able to do this any longer. And it happened with the AVMSD. So when we had the Audiovisual Media Services Directive, they circumvented it. A number of them. Well, now there's the regulation in place and provisions in Article 7 addressing this. Then Article 5 with the provisions which are actually preventing the capture of public service media. And there we relate to both transparent and adequate funding on the one hand, and then also nomination, dismissal of the leadership of the public service media. I think it's also a really important provision that we now have in place. Concentration and how ENFA tackles concentration. We do have the board. Yes, we should have had a more courageous approach to the board, and I agree with that. And with the different discussions that we had within the European Parliament, within the House, when we discussed the structure and the power of the board. But I think it's now the fact that it has a capacity to evaluate the impact of future media concentrations. It doesn't go back in time, but it can evaluate this impact and issue opinions and look at media pluralism. I think it is an important step forward. Then allocation of state funding and distortion of the market. We do have Article 25, and I think in Article 25 there are provisions calling for this fair distribution of state resources, transparency on state advertising, which is crucial. Then abuses, all kinds of abuses, and I'm thinking of the license of club radio from some years ago, but other examples were mentioned as well. Now, basically, those concerned media services providers will actually be able to contest some of these measures and refer these measures to the board. Yes, it will not fix all problems, but now we can address some of them with MFA. Then Slovakia in particular, I mentioned about how concerned we are as well with the government's plans, and we can see them. We also saw the proposed law on the public service media that was withdrawn actually before the second round of the presidential elections. It was a really good sign on how Fico's government will handle things and where Fico is heading. That law is basically that the draft law is in clear violation of Article 5 of MFA. And at this point, I think should it not have been withdrawn, then there you see a very strong case for the Commission to start an infringement procedure against Fico's government. And this is exactly that kind of situation where you see that you have tools to address these issues. Yes, and then of course attacks on journalists, editorial independence, protection of sources, and you do have Article 6.2 when it comes to the interference of any kind in this editorial processes. Then private interferences, Article 4.1, then 4.2, which is addressing the protection of sources, spying on journalists, and creating this really strong set of safeguards for journalists in case they're being investigated. And that was one of the major fights of the parliament. And you all know the issues related to national security and things being put on the table by member states. And we won this battle. I didn't expect at the beginning that again we will be able to win it, because it was not the case with other files addressing similar situations, but here we made it, and I'm actually really proud of what the parliament did. Is it enough? No, it's not by far enough. Does it depend on implementation and how the Commission will be able to ensure that these member states actually stick to the provisions of the law? Yes, it really depends a lot on that. And I think that the Commission has to take this role very seriously. And when things happen, they have to react. They have to react with infringement procedures. Also, I think on the rule of law framework, a lot more needs to be done, because we're seeing backsliding again. Mr. Orban was almost untouchable when it came to this kind of issues, and the whole discussion around Article 7. You all know it. I'm not going to go back to that. But I think additionally, what the regulation brings, apart from the Commission being a guardian of the EU law legislation and the treaties, is that journalists themselves can go to court and use the regulation so that they defend their rights and I think this is important as well. What I would plea for in this upcoming mandate and then in the next years is that we need a permanent independent fund for news and for investigative journalists and journalists. And we cannot jump from one pilot project to the other and use bits and pieces, because I do believe that this type of funding, serious funding for independent projects managed by independent organizations, and I would like to underline that it's very important that this money is being managed by independent organizations. I think it is crucial. We definitely need these resources for those for the local media, for those journalists under attack. I do not see how media outlets can survive without this type of funding. I also think that each and every entity involved in the application of legislation, EU legislation, and lawyers, courts, everybody involved should be trained properly, in the sense that they should understand what the new legislation brings, and I'm also thinking here of the anti-SLAPP direction, obviously, so that they see that things need to be done properly, and that journalists now have a special type of protection, like, for example, and I would dare to say it is essential, like immunities for politicians, like the special protection that the judges and the courts have in member states, because the journalists are the only ones that do not enjoy any kind of protection in this framework, with basically the three pillars of the rule of law, where actually free press is the fourth pillar of any democracy and rule of law system. So yes, this being said, like I mentioned in the beginning, it's far from being perfect. I think people along with governments have to play a very active role in protecting free media, and I do hope that the Commission will act, and it will act swiftly and quickly when things that the ones that you described happen, once MFRR is in place, because otherwise I'm afraid that some of these governments will react with impunity and will continue to attack media freedom.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ramona. I think you kind of hit the nail on the head there with the issue of implementation, because that is really key. I mean, we have a law that provides a number of tools, but the question is, how will the Commission implement it, and will it really be effective in practice? And I think that's what we still need to see. And I think the other issue that you mentioned is the rule of law, because we can talk about courts and allowing journalists to uphold these types of laws in court, but if the court system itself isn't independent, if there's political pressure, we see this in these illiberal governments with Hungary and Poland, the attacks on judicial independence, that raises a whole another set of questions. So I want to, unfortunately, won't have time to take questions from the audience today, because I've hit the top of the hour, so going to wrap up. But I want to give the last word to Beata. I saw that you had your hand up. And maybe perhaps just a brief response to what you heard from Ramona, but maybe also just one final comment from you about the issue of resilience. And this is something that Bartosz mentioned as well, within society, within the journalistic community, because one of the things about Slovakia that's always been, I think, impressive, for lack of a better word, is the solidarity among the journalistic community and the response of the journalistic community to attacks on the press. And maybe just as a last word from you, is that something that you still have hope in, that there is this strong will to push back against the attacks on media, maybe as a message of hope at the end, if it's there?
I think the resilience is still there. And I think that among journalists, it's more and more journalists are realizing that it's also a test of their personal integrity. But at the very end, I need to mention something that we hasn't really discussed that much, and it's the role of platforms and the fact that this is something which we are, I think, the most dependent on the Commission and the European Union putting pressure. Because if you imagine that just only in Slovakia, 85% of the digitally active population is active on Facebook, and they are getting their news from Facebook. And there, we media, we are actually in the position of maybe VIP clients now with the Media Freedom Act, that the platforms are supposed to talk to us more, but the way platforms are treating politicians as versus journalists is imbalanced. And so this is how fundamentally the relationship of societies to truth might change. And of course, there is resilience, but you can maintain resilience only if large part of the society can agree on facts and large parts of the societies can agree on reality. So I needed to mention that aspect, which of course, it wasn't part of the discussion, but I feel the need to mention that. And maybe just to what you said about the atmosphere in Slovakia, just last week there was a Black Day, and even news editorial offices outside of the public media network, everybody dressed in black, and people, journalists, were posting their pictures online and expressing solidarity. So I think that even Robert Fico understands that the part of the journalistic community sticks together, and that we are also protecting definitions of what journalism is. And we need to try to find ways to explain that to the public. But on the other hand, and that's why Robert Fico is building another empire of manipulators and propaganda where those values don't really count. And I think that it's also a responsibility towards the next generations of people, because if we wake up in 10 years and we would look up like how people understand journalism, if we are not careful, I think we might be very shocked like what journalism might become.
Thanks, Beata. Some really important messages to close on there. We do unfortunately have to wrap up. Sorry, Ramona, did you want to add one last thing? I couldn't tell. Yes, please.
Yes, I'm sorry. Handling two devices here because you're projected on from one device to the other. So, just a very short reaction to what Beata has said. I'm not afraid of what journalists might become, because I've never met people braver than journalists, and people more passionate about their work and with a higher dose of resilience and courage. I'm worried about our capacity to defend our values by empowering these people and allowing them to properly do their job. I think this is where we need more education. We need mechanisms that need to function and strengthen piece by piece with each and every piece of legislation that we are able to do, and then each and every person that we convince to support and read free journalism and also financially support free journalism. That you know, the more we do it, the better we'll be able to ensure this environment for journalists. But people who are journalists, I'm talking about journalists, and not talking about propaganda machines, will do their job until the end. This is the most valuable lesson that I have learned in all of these years, and it's quite amazing. And I'm really grateful for that.
Thank you, Ramona, and a great message for World Press Freedom Day tomorrow. I want to thank all of you for joining this webinar, Beata, Stefan, Ramona, as well as Bartosz, who had to leave a bit ahead of time. Thank you to all the participants for taking part today. We appreciate that. Thanks for caring about media freedom, and wishing everyone a happy World Press Freedom Day tomorrow. Thank you, and good afternoon, everybody.